Landlord refused to fix my heat, so I reported him and got the building condemned. I woke up on Monday able to see my breath in the air inside my apartment. It was the third day in a row of waking up in a freezing cold bedroom, and I was beyond frustrated. My landlord had one job: keep the heat running during one of the coldest winters on record, and he couldn't even be bothered to do that. I piled on 2 sweaters and shuffled into the living room, where I could literally feel the chill seeping through the thin windows. This wasn't a new problem. For weeks, the heat in my building had been spotty at best. Some nights it would clank on for an hour of lukewarm air. Most nights, nothing. My unit's thermostat read 45 degrees Fahrenheit, 7 degrees Celsius that morning. Inside, I wish I were exaggerating. I'm an average tenant, pay rent on time, don't throw loud parties, keep the place clean. In return, all I expect is a livable apartment. But my landlord, Gary, not his real name, seemed to think basic maintenance was optional. The boiler in the basement was ancient. Last winter it had cut out for a week, and Gary's solution was to hand out a few cheap space heaters and tell us to deal with it. My electric bill shot up, and one of those space heaters even overloaded a circuit and knocked out power for half a day. Gary shrugged it off. That was his style. Do the bare minimum, if that. I had called and texted Gary a dozen times about the heat. Each time he either ignored me or replied with something like, "I'll get to it," or "Just buy a space heater." It's like he didn't care that this was literally a health hazard. On really cold nights, I could see frost forming on the inside of my kitchen window. I tried to be patient at first. I really did. I get that old buildings have quirks and things break. But this wasn't a random fluke. Our boiler had been on the fritz since last winter, and Gary just patched it up with cheap fixes enough to limp through until spring. Now it was December again, and surprise, the boiler finally kicked the bucket for real. On Monday, after getting dressed in what felt like Siberian conditions, I went downstairs to talk to my neighbor, Mrs. Thompson, who's been in the building for 30 years. She's 78 and lives off a small pension. We chatted often. She was like the grandma of the building, always looking out for everyone. I knocked on her door and immediately shivered when she opened it. The poor woman was bundled in 2 coats and a knit cap inside her living room. She offered me a cup of tea. Her stove was gas, luckily, and we commiserated over the lack of heat. She told me she hadn't been able to sleep well because of the cold and was worried about getting sick. That was the last straw for me. It's one thing for me, a healthy 30-year-old, to tough it out, but an elderly lady shouldn't have to risk hypothermia in her own home. I'd already left Gary a voicemail that morning, which of course he didn't return. So sitting there in Mrs. Thompson's apartment, watching her breath fog up in front of her face, I decided enough was enough. I pulled out my phone and dialed the city's housing inspection department. I explained the situation. No heat for extended periods, elderly tenants at risk, landlord unresponsive. The clerk on the phone sounded concerned and promised to send an inspector that very day. I felt a surge of vindication, and honestly, a bit of nerves. I'd never reported a landlord before. It felt drastic but necessary. After hanging up, I shot a quick text to the building group chat. I called the city. "Inspector coming today." Responses flooded in almost instantly. "OMG, thank you," wrote one neighbor. Another warned that Gary would flip his lid if he found out who called. I was nervous but resolute. What else could we do? Around noon, I heard a commotion downstairs. Peeking out into the hallway, I saw a man in a city uniform with a clipboard talking to another tenant on the second floor. The inspector had arrived quicker than expected. I quickly slipped down the stairs to join them. The inspector introduced himself and said he was here, responding to a complaint about lack of heat. Before I could even speak, 2 more neighbors gathered, all eager to vent their frustrations. There was Mr. Lee from the top floor, who grumbled that his kids had to sleep in the same bed to stay warm, and Anna from next door to me, who cursed in Spanish under her breath about how many times she'd told Gary about this. It felt validating to see others as righteously angry as I was. We led the inspector into the basement where the building's furnace and boiler were. He had a flashlight and took notes as we descended the creaky stairs. The basement was a horror show. Even I could tell at a glance that nothing down there was up to code. There were exposed electrical wires, sagging from the ceiling, some with electrical tape peeling off. A pipe in the corner was leaking a steady trickle of water onto the floor, which explained the perpetual mildew smell in the lobby. The boiler itself, an ancient cast-iron monstrosity probably older than me, was clearly offline, its pilot light out. The inspector knelt down and tested a valve, only to have it snap off in his hand, corroded through. He gave a low whistle and jotted furiously on his clipboard. The whole time, I was texting updates to the group chat I had with a couple of the younger tenants. Everyone was on edge. We loved the location and cheap rent, but this heat issue was unbearable. Some were worried that if we pissed off Gary too much, he'd retaliate or refuse to renew leases. I admit, that fear had kept me from calling the city sooner. In the back of my mind, I remembered how Gary had treated a tenant last year who dared complain to the city about a broken stairwell light. He slapped them with bogus fees until they moved out. Gary had a vindictive streak, and we all knew it. Still, watching that inspector scribble down violation after violation, I felt a grim sense of justice brewing. It was too late for second-guessing now. Then, right on cue, who comes barreling down the basement steps but Gary himself? Someone must have warned him the city was here. Maybe the building super, Gary's cousin, who lived a block away. Gary was a big guy in his 50s, with a permanent scowl and a beer belly. He practically pushed me aside as he stormed up to the inspector. "What's going on here?" he barked. "Who authorized you to be in my building?" The inspector stood up calmly. "Sir, I'm from the City Housing and Safety Office. We received complaints of unsafe conditions. By law, I have the authority to inspect." Gary cut him off, jabbing a finger in his face. "This is bullshit. Probably that whiner in 3B making stuff up again. Everything's fine here. I don't know what you've heard, but the heat's working. We've had a few minor issues, all fixed." I stepped forward, heart pounding but fueled by anger. "Minor issues? Gary, it's freezing. None of us have had consistent heat for weeks. We've all called you. You ignored every one of us." He spun to glare at me. "Oh, it was you, huh? You called the city?" His face was turning red with either anger or exertion. Maybe both. I didn't flinch. "You gave me no choice. Mrs. Thompson could get hypothermia. The pipes already froze in 2A and burst last night. Did you even know about that? We're tired of your excuses." As if on cue, the inspector shone his light on a section of pipe that had indeed ruptured and been crudely patched with duct tape. Water was seeping out slowly. The inspector looked at Gary with a hard stare. "Sir, this building is clearly in violation of multiple housing codes. I'm seeing leaking pipes, unsafe wiring, and a non-functional heating system in the middle of winter. These are serious issues." Gary blustered. "I was just about to get a contractor in to fix all this. You people are overreacting. No one was going to get hypothermia. This is my building. I maintain it as I see fit." The inspector shook his head. "Not good enough. By law, you're required to provide heat. And these other violations, I'm sorry, but I have to issue a notice." He started writing something in triplicate on a form from his clipboard. Gary tried to snatch the pen from him, sputtering. Wait, let's be reasonable. I can fix it, okay? I'll get the heat on tonight, I swear. Just no need to write anything up. I can take care of it." The inspector sidestepped Gary's grab and shot him a stern look. "Sir, step back. This is not optional. Given the extent of these problems, I have to declare this building uninhabitable until repairs are made and it passes a follow-up inspection." My stomach dropped. Uninhabitable? That word echoed in my head like a gunshot. I knew calling the city might cause trouble, but I hadn't expected this. Mr. Lee and Anna looked at each other in shock. Gary started yelling, "You can't do that. Where are my tenants supposed to go? You're going to put people out on the street in the dead of winter. How is that helping anyone?" The inspector replied in a level tone, "It's your responsibility to provide a safe living environment. You failed to do so, and now people are at risk. I'm posting a condemnation notice. All residents will need to vacate within 48 hours. Condemned." The word hit like a hammer. Anna covered her mouth, eyes wide. Mr. Lee swore under his breath. I felt a mix of triumph and panic swirling in my gut. This is what I wanted, right? To hold Gary accountable? But now all of us were effectively being evicted. Temporarily, at least. None of us had expected the city to drop the hammer so fast and so hard. Gary, of course, immediately pointed at me. "This is your doing," he snarled. "You just had to call them, didn't you? Are you happy now, you little shit? You've screwed everyone in this building, including yourself." I shot back, voice trembling with adrenaline. "No, Gary, you did this. We wouldn't have had a call if you actually did your damn job. This is on you." He advanced on me, and for a second I thought he might actually swing at me. I instinctively raised my phone, which was still in my hand, and blurted out, "Touch me, and you'll regret it." I had no idea what I'd do if he did. Call the cops again, I guess, but in that moment I was done being bullied. The inspector put himself between us. "Sir, I need you to back off, right now, or I'll call for police assistance." Gary stopped, realizing the trouble he was in, and turned away, cursing to himself as he stomped up the stairs out of the basement. The inspector then explained to the rest of us what happened next. The city would formally condemn the building by that evening, meaning they'd stick notices on all entrances declaring it unsafe. We tenants would have 48 hours to vacate. We could come back with an appointment to gather larger belongings later, but living here was not allowed until repairs were done and the building passed re-inspection, which, he warned, could take weeks or months given how many violations he'd noted. As we all trudged back upstairs in a daze, the reality sank in. I had basically just gotten myself and all my neighbors kicked out of our homes right before Christmas. I looked around at the chipped paint in the stairwell and the familiar dim lighting, and it hit me that the place I'd called home for the past 2 years was about to become a ghost building. Anxiety started eating at my initial feeling of victory. I knew Gary was the true cause, but I still felt guilty as hell seeing my neighbors worry about where they'd go. In the lobby, the inspector taped a big red unsafe, do not occupy notice on the wall. Mrs. Thompson was standing in the hall in her coat, watching the commotion. I went to her and gently explained what was happening. She looked devastated, and my heart broke. I promised to help her find somewhere warm to stay. The city would likely offer emergency relocation assistance, the inspector mentioned, especially for an elderly tenant. But it was still an enormous disruption, and not nearly as simple as staying in the home she'd known for decades. That afternoon was chaos. Tenants were knocking on each other's doors, sharing news, scrambling to arrange places to stay. I passed by Mr. Lee, comforting his shivering twin boys, promising them they'd sleep at their uncle's house for a while. Down the hall, Anna was on the phone in tears, desperately trying to explain to her boss why she couldn't come into work tomorrow. One single mom on the first floor was frantically calling her sister, voice shaking as she begged for a spare room for her and her baby. Another neighbor was already dragging 2 suitcases out to his car, muttering about finding a motel. The whole building was in panic mode. I spent a few hours helping Mrs. Thompson pack a small bag, and then drove her to her granddaughter's house across town. She kept apologizing to me, of all things, for all this trouble, and I kept assuring her it wasn't her fault at all. My own anger at Gary was simmering hotter by the second, but I also felt a pit of guilt in my stomach for being the spark that set this chain of events in motion. When I got back to the building in the early evening to grab a few essentials from my apartment, I saw Gary in the lobby furiously peeling the condemnation notice off the wall. He tore it down and ripped it to shreds. I quietly pulled out my phone and snapped a photo of him doing it, partly for the record, partly out of spite. I figured if he tried to pretend later that he never saw the notice, I'd have proof of the stunt. He noticed me and spat out, "I hope you're fucking satisfied. You realize you're all homeless now, right? You think anyone's gonna rent to you after this stunt? You'll be blacklisted. I'll make sure of it." I didn't take the bait. I just said, "Should have fixed the heat, Gary," and walked upstairs, ignoring the stream of profanity he hurled at my back. My hands were shaking. I'd never seen him that angry, and it honestly scared me. I hastily threw some clothes and toiletries into a suitcase. As I was leaving, I noticed he'd followed me up and was standing at the end of the hall, just watching with this wild look in his eyes. We locked eyes for a moment. In his face, I saw pure hatred. Without another word, I left the building. My home, unsure if I'd ever set foot in it again. I drove to a friend's place to crash on their couch, heart pounding and mind racing. What had I done? On one hand, I felt vindicated Gary was finally facing consequences, and maybe now things would actually get fixed properly. On the other hand, I had upended not just my life, but the lives of everyone in that building. My friend greeted me at the door and took one look at my exhausted face before pulling me into a hug. Later that night, wrapped in a spare blanket on his couch, I listened to the soothing hum of a functional heater. He told me I'd done the right thing, that the building was a death trap and this needed to happen. I tried to let that comfort me as I stared up at the dark ceiling. I was technically homeless now, but at least I wasn't freezing. Still, I couldn't shake the inner chill of uncertainty about what would come next. Update 1. 1 week later. It's been a little over a week since the building was condemned, and life has been equal parts chaotic and surreal. I'm currently living out of a suitcase in a tiny spare room that a college friend offered me. It's cramped, but I'm beyond grateful to have a warm place to sleep. I finally have a moment to breathe and update everyone on what's been happening. First off, the day after my original post, I went back to the building, with permission from the city, to gather the rest of my belongings. The city scheduled specific windows of time for each of us to safely enter, since technically, the place is off limits now. Walking into my apartment was so eerie. The heat was still off, of course, so it was just as frigid as before, but now it was dark and empty. The hallway lights had been cut for safety, and I had to use a flashlight to navigate. My breath echoed in the silence of what used to be a lively building. I wish I could say the move-out was smooth, but surprise, Gary showed up while I was there. I was in my apartment packing the last of my clothes into boxes when I heard his voice in the hallway. He was talking to someone, sounded like one of the maintenance guys, and he was furious. Something about the tone made me hit record on my phone and pocket it just in case. Sure enough, a minute later he was pounding on my doorframe. The door was propped open as I was carrying things out. He started in with this faux sweet, sarcastic voice. "Need any help moving, buddy?" I ignored him and kept packing, my heart thudding. Then he dropped the act and began ranting. He said I had no idea what I'd done, that I'd made him lose a fortune, and that I was going to pay for it one way or another. I didn't engage, just calmly told him I was only taking what I owned and then I'd be gone. He laughed and said, "Good, don't ever come back. Tenants like you are nothing but trouble." I bit my tongue so hard I tasted blood. I wanted to scream at him about how he was the one who caused this, but I also didn't want to get into a face-to-face shouting match when I was alone in a dead building with the guy. The whole time, my phone was recording his every word. Eventually, he left, muttering curses as he went downstairs, and I released a breath I hadn't realized I was holding. For what it's worth, I got everything out. Most of the other tenants did too. A few of my neighbors have already moved to new apartments across town. They're done with Gary and don't intend to ever return even if the building gets fixed. I can't blame them. I'm looking for a new place myself, because I have zero trust that Gary will ever get his act together. Speaking of which, here's some justicey news. The city slapped Gary with a hefty fine for the violations. I don't know the exact amount, but I heard from the inspector. I gave him a call to ask about retrieving belongings safely, and he gave me a bit of an update, that it was tens of thousands of dollars. On top of that, the city is billing him for the emergency relocation assistance they provided to some tenants who had nowhere else to go. Mrs. Thompson, for instance, is staying in a hotel paid for by a city program until we figure out a better solution for her, and that's all going on Gary's tab. Gary has been radio silent towards me directly, aside from the in-person outburst during my move-out. However, he did have the audacity to send an email to all the tenants a few days ago. It was a long, rambling rant about how we overreacted and how we ruined Christmas for ourselves by calling the city. He claimed he had a repairman scheduled the very next week, and that if we had just waited, none of this would have happened. Yeah, right. He then pivoted to playing the victim, saying the city was extorting him with fines and that he cares deeply about our safety, etc. It was honestly pathetic. Not once did he actually apologize or accept responsibility. He ended the email by suggesting that if anyone wants to return when the building is reopened, he'll offer a small discount on January rent as a gesture of goodwill. I nearly threw my phone when I read that part. A discount, after we all nearly froze and got booted out. Unbelievable. Needless to say, most of us are not planning on going back. A couple neighbors replied all to his email with some choice words. One told him to go fuck himself, poetic and direct, and another said they were contacting a lawyer about breaking the lease and retrieving their security deposit. About the lease and deposit. We did get some legal advice. A few of us banded together and reached out to a tenant's rights attorney. The attorney basically said that because the building is officially condemned, the leases are likely considered void, meaning none of us are obligated to keep paying rent, obviously, and Gary should refund our deposits since he breached the habitability guarantee. Will he actually do that without a fight? Doubtful. But at least we have the law on our side. The lawyer sent him a formal letter on behalf of several tenants demanding return of deposits and prorated December rent. Gary hasn't responded yet, of course. I'm fully prepared to take him to small claims court if he doesn't cough up the money. On the personal front, it's been an emotional roller coaster. I keep oscillating between feeling guilty for the upheaval and feeling righteous anger. One moment I'll be looking at new apartment listings and get hit with this wave of why did it have to come to this. I ran into Mrs. Thompson yesterday. I check in on her every couple of days. She gave me a big hug and thanked me for standing up to Gary, saying that none of this was my fault. She even baked me cookies. The woman is an angel. That made me tear up a bit, not gonna lie. It helped me feel like maybe I did do the right thing after all, despite the collateral mess. There's no resolution yet on the building itself. It's still sitting empty, a big brick popsicle with that red condemnation notice on the door. Well, a new one that the city reposted after Gary ripped down the first. The inspector told me they fined him for removing it. Gary hasn't even started any repairs, as far as I can tell. Driving by the other day, I saw no contractors or work permits posted. Maybe he doesn't have the money or is too busy sulking. Meanwhile, the wheels are turning on our side. The tenants who haven't scattered are organizing. We have a group chat going, without Gary, obviously, where we're sharing resources and information. Someone mentioned that this wasn't Gary's only property. Apparently he owns a few rundown rentals across town. That got us all thinking. If he's pulled this crap on us, he's probably doing it elsewhere. We haven't acted on that hunch yet. But let's just say there's talk of tipping off the housing authority to inspect his other buildings too. If he wants to play dirty, we can up the ante. But I'll save that for another update if it happens. For now, I'm focusing on finding a new, safe place to live and helping my former neighbors get back on their feet. To everyone who commented and sent support, thank you. Seriously. This has been one of the craziest weeks of my life, but knowing people out there understand why I did what I did has kept me sane. I'll update again if there are any big developments, and something tells me this saga with Gary isn't over yet. Update 2, 3 months later. Buckle up, because a lot has happened in the past few months. Honestly, I could probably write a novel about this entire saga by now. I'll try to keep this update focused though, because the fallout from condemning the building has been even more dramatic and messier than I anticipated. First, on the home front, I finally moved into a new apartment. It's a small one-bedroom across town. Not as cheap as the old place. Ugh, the rent prices in this city are killer. But it's clean, safe, and most importantly, warm. Every time I hear the furnace click on, I feel a mix of relief and lingering anger from what I went through. But I'm doing okay. Mrs. Thompson ended up moving in with her granddaughter permanently. She decided she'd had enough of living alone in crappy buildings. A couple of my other former neighbors have scattered around the city in new rentals, and we keep in touch occasionally. It's weird how quickly our little community disbanded, but we're all trying to move on. Now, on to Gary. Remember how some of us were talking about tipping off the housing authorities about his other properties? Well, we did just that. We found out through public records that he owned 3 other apartment houses, all in the same low-income neighborhoods, all likely maintained just as poorly. We weren't about to snoop around ourselves, but we didn't have to. We simply gave the addresses to the city inspectors and let them do their thing. And boy did they. Within weeks, I started hearing snippets. One of Gary's other buildings got slapped with multiple violations for mold and a leaky roof. Another one, the worst from what I hear, actually had gas leaks and faulty smoke alarms. The city temporarily evacuated that building for safety, just like ours. So Gary basically got not 1, but 2 condemned buildings in the span of a month. The third property had issues too, but not severe enough to evacuate. Still, he got fined for things like rodent infestations and no hot water. This all came to light gradually. But once the dominoes started falling, Gary's little slum empire was crumbling fast. As you might imagine, he did not take it well. I wasn't privy to his personal life, but a former tenant from one of those buildings found me on Facebook through the tenant group we formed and shared some updates. Apparently, Gary went ballistic when the second building was condemned. There were rumors he was blaming sabotage and accusing tenants of plotting against him. Gee, wonder where he'd get that idea. According to this person, Gary was seen yelling at a city inspector on the sidewalk, and he actually got briefly detained by police for making threats. So yeah, he was unraveling. Meanwhile, our group of tenants pursued the legal route for our deposits and damages. We filed in small claims court as a group, and there was a hearing about 6 weeks after the condemnation. To my surprise, Gary actually showed up to that hearing. He looked disheveled and much older than I remembered. I guess the stress was hitting him hard. The moment the judge let him speak, Gary launched into a sob story about how the city had screwed him over, how we were all liars, how he was practically bankrupt now, etc. The judge cut him off and firmly pointed out that none of that was relevant to the fact that he failed to provide a habitable apartment. In the end, the court ruled in our favor by default, since the evidence, inspection reports, photos, etc., was overwhelmingly on our side. Gary was ordered to refund our security deposits and 1 month's rent to each of us who joined the suit. Victory, right? Well, sort of. As expected, Gary being ordered to pay doesn't mean Gary can or will pay. Big shock, he hasn't paid a dime yet. Through the grapevine, I heard he's in serious financial trouble. No kidding. Between the fines, lost rent, and now multiple empty buildings, he's bleeding money. There's talk that he's trying to sell the condemned buildings, possibly to some developer who will gut renovate them. Good riddance, I say. But if he thinks selling will let him dodge his debts to us, he's got another thing coming. Our lawyer filed liens against the properties for the judgment amounts, so he can't sell without clearing that first. At least that's the theory. We'll see how it plays out. I'm not holding my breath for a fat check, but it feels good to know we have some leverage. Now for the part that has me still shaking as I write this, the personal fallout. A week ago, I got an unmarked envelope in the mail at my new address. Inside was a single sheet of paper with a short message constructed from cutout magazine letters. Yes, like a cliché ransom note. It read, "You will regret ever messes with my business. Watch your back." The lack of proofreading aside, seriously messes, it was clearly meant to threaten and scare me. There was no signature, of course, but who else could that be from? I haven't gone to the police yet because, technically, it could be anyone, but come on. I'm 99% sure it's Gary or someone associated with him. I took a photo of the note and forwarded it to our tenant group and lawyer. The lawyer advised me to document everything and consider a restraining order if there's any more direct threat or contact. To be honest, that note rattled me more than I expected. I've been looking over my shoulder everywhere I go. I'm extra cautious coming home from work, and I had a security camera installed by my apartment door just in case. Part of me thinks he's all bluster. Gary's pride is shattered and he's lashing out. But another part worries he's truly unhinged now. A man with nothing to lose can be dangerous. Just when I thought it couldn't get more intense, last night I heard from one of the remaining tenants from our old building's group chat. Apparently, Gary was arrested 2 days ago. The charge? Insurance fraud and possibly arson. From what I gather, he tried to set fire to the condemned building, our old home, to claim an insurance payout. The fire department responded quickly, so the building still stands, and forensic investigators found evidence of accelerants. If this is true, it's both horrifying and weirdly poetic. The man who wouldn't provide heat tried to burn the whole place down. I guess that's one way to solve a heating problem. I don't know what will happen next. If the arson and fraud charges stick, Gary could be looking at jail time. Part of me feels a grim satisfaction. This is the bed he made, and now he might literally have to lie in a jail cot, but I'm also just tired. Tired of the drama, the fear, the uncertainty. None of this is how I envisioned my life when I simply asked my landlord to fix the damn heat. As of now, the building I once lived in is still empty, still unsafe, and now forever tainted by the stunt Gary pulled. I drive by it occasionally, can't really avoid it on my commute, and it makes my stomach twist every time. So many memories, both good and bad, are locked up in those dark windows.